So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Richard Clark, or Rich Clark, and I've been a hypnotherapist for the last 9 years, and I've been a hypnotherapist for the last 15 years. So, the topic I'm going to talk about today is one which seems to get very misstrued on social media, and people seem to therapize themselves. And I want to explain the difference between these things. So, I'm going to explain the difference between narcissists, a sociopath, and a psychopath. And what I'm going to do is also explain about how they would work and how you notice them traits in therapy, how you notice them traits in society, and what actually they are. Because many people use the term, this person's a narcissist, but they're actually more of a sociopath. And if they do things which are very extreme, they're actually a psychopath. So I'm going to explain a bit more. So to explain this, what traits would you notice in sessions with a hypnotherapist, a psychotherapist, or a psychologist? So the differences are between these personality patterns and how they might present in different therapeutic settings, while noting that formal diagnosis requires extensive professional evaluation. So when you ever meet someone who wants to go to a hypnotherapist or psychotherapist and so forth, you also have to know what their medication is, whether they are on things to calm them down, whatever that is. So you need a lot of medical records before you work with anybody on that. Personally, myself, I would try and steer away from psychopaths or sociopaths. Narcissists you can kind of work with a bit easier, ironically. So here's some narcissistic traits. So some of the narcissistic traits are the following. The primary focus on self-importance and grandiosity. So the thing is, when you see this focus on themselves, people who are selfish are seen as narcissists. Not necessarily true, but if they do grand gestures or it's all about themselves, which would usually be a symbol in Vedic culture of their solar plexus is too, but their connection to the cells is too much. It's overwhelming. Their need for constant admiration and validation is very much common, and this is what you find in some children sometimes, is that when they're totally valued or they're totally admired, they then actually grow up to be narcissists. And if then they also know they get away with what they do and they're very manipulative, they're sociopaths, and if they're very much playing mental games, they're psychopaths. This is whether you would believe it or not, but this is what it actually is from a medical point of view. The lack of empathy, but can display when it serves their interests. So when you put the lack of empathy is that they're literally emotionally cut off, but when it serves themselves, then they can show empathy to get what they want. That's very much a narcissistic trait. The extreme sensitivism to criticism, while frequently criticising others. So criticising others, but they cannot handle criticism. The one thing is, though, we've got to understand is that if you get criticised, there's constructive criticism, which is to make you better, but then being criticised all the time from someone who isn't actually living a life where they should be, and a perfect example, is an issue. So this is something you always have to watch out for. And again, we watch out for this as therapists, also when we meet people. This is where the therapy head, sometimes you have to turn it off and on when you meet people, but actually when you meet people, it's very common. Narcissists are often successful and highly functioning in their careers, because they're very, as we would say, selfish. They're not. They're selfless in that respect because they've got a certain goal, and that's why we see very much people who they say are anybody who's ambitious also can be narcissistic. And the idea of narcissist, if we actually understand who narcissist is actually from the Greek god, who was actually someone who fell in love with their own reflection and actually died looking at their own reflection because they couldn't eat, couldn't do anything because they were so in love with themselves. So when they say love yourself, you have to also be wary of when you actually say that term, because loving yourself is actually a very good thing. Have love, care for yourself and so forth. But when it actually goes to an extreme, it becomes narcissism. So in therapy, a narcissistic individuals might try to establish superiority over the therapist. You get that a lot with narcissists, and it's very easy to actually control, because you just allow them to think they control you, but you can just do little things and you can find ways of getting them. But again, you've got to be careful because they will see it as criticism. So you have to be very wary of narcissists. They resist genuine emotional vulnerability. So the thing is, because of that general vulnerability, they struggle with psychotherapists and physio and psychologists. They can get around with that. With a hypnotherapist, because you're going into their subconscious, they can't get around that because the subconscious comes out.